Hey friends, ever catch yourself wondering, am I just a weekend warrior or already a full-blown drunk or addict? Me too. Back in college, driving with one eye half closed to avoid seeing double. But stick with me, because today we are diving into the fine line between problem drinking and full-blown alcoholism. Now, this applies to any type of addiction too. Now, trust me though, there is hope on the other side, so watch till the end for some powerful insights and maybe a couple jokes or two that just might save someone's life. Not the jokes. Let me start with a confession. So back in college, I would drive legally blind. So this whole thing like this, I would do this squinting because who needs both eyes when tequila makes you see double? So that is the beginning of problem drinking. For me, the problem drinking had accelerated. But the point is, I thought it was pretty funny to do this so that I wouldn't see double when I was driving. Then there were blackouts. There were waking up, not knowing, did I meet the president? I was in Fairbanks, Alaska, so probably not. Or did I just meet my couch cushions? One morning, I found my apartment clouded in smoke. Apparently, I broiled some salmon, passed out, and nearly barbecued the place. Okay, so I laugh now, but it wasn't funny then because I could have burnt my place down and myself. So here's the kicker, friends. Problem drinking begins as exactly this, a pattern of alcohol use that leads to some negative consequences. So in college, I also got arrested. I got a DUI. This was the beginning of me thinking maybe you've got a problem, right? I was moving in towards alcoholism at that time, but the physical dependence hadn't kicked in, if that makes sense, okay? So alcoholism and alcohol use disorder, as we call it now, means consequences just keep happening. So this is when we become an alcoholic, is when this type of behavior that I've described just keeps continuing and continuing. It gets worse and worse. It wrecks your life, but you still keep doing it. So problem drinking can get you into trouble. Think the one-off DUI, the fight at Thanksgiving, okay? Alcohol use disorder, full-blown addiction, you're living in trouble. So it's not just bad choices. The brain has been rewired. For example, neuroscience shows that when we drink and use drugs and stuff, our brain is flooded with dopamine, those feel-good chemicals. There's a lot of different ones, neurotransmitters, things like that, and they exist in this reward pathway in the brain. But with time, the brain overreacts and actually cuts back on its own dopamine production. When you're feeding it all this stuff, when you're getting drunk, when you're shooting up, when you're snorting crank or cocaine. Going back to alcohol, you need more and more just to feel normal. This is called tolerance. Without it, you get detox, you get shakes, you get anxiety, you get withdrawal, you get physical symptoms, vomiting, diarrhea, all these things. So right? It's like eating a cake. At first, one slice is great. Then after 10 slices, your brain's like, nope, I'm good, right? And so as time goes on, you need, 5 pieces for the same buzz. Only with addiction, the cake is meth. The cake is wine. So problem drinking versus addiction, let's break it down. Problem drinking might look like me in college, fun nights that sometimes turn into wild mornings. Think of it like in high school, the guy that always got into fights when he was drinking. Or for me, it was everyone else could take it or leave it, but me, Jody, was always looking for alcohol, always looking for the drink. So these were early signs of problem drinking, and problem drinking is highly likely to turn into addiction later in life without intervention. So the more we continue to drink, the more we continue into problem drinking, the more likely your brain and body is going to say, hey, we need this regularly. So addiction, alcohol use disorder, it's more severe. It's when your drinking is impaired. It's when you try to cut back, you try to stop, you can't. So there's the DSM-5 criteria that we use for mental use disorders and stuff like that. There is 11 criteria for substance use disorder. These are things like constant cravings, giving up hobbies, tolerance. And if you hit enough of these, a therapist, doctor, addiction treatment person might diagnose you as alcohol use disorder or addiction. We call it alcohol use disorder because alcohol is an addiction may be something you struggle with, but it's trying to avoid the label like you're an addict, you're an alcoholic, that kind of a thing, because it can be condemning. So that's the reason for that. That doesn't mean don't go to AA and stand up and say, I'm Jody, I'm an alcoholic. I did that, and there's nothing wrong with that either. There's a lot of different theories on that, okay? But you don't need an official label to spot the danger. So tolerance, you need more and more to feel the same buzz. Okay. Withdrawal, you feel sick, anxious, shaky without a drink. Waking up, you need the alcohol, you need the booze, you need Tylenol and therapy when you wake up. You start shaking. Alcohol detox is the one that can actually kill you. So people don't understand this. Sometimes you have to give a person alcohol so that they don't seizure out and die. We had to do this with my brother before he passed away. This is serious business. Okay. The other sign, loss of control. You're drinking more than you intended over time. You neglect responsibilities, work, school, your relationships begin to suffer, things like that start to happen. For me, it was more, I was young and I was single, but I missed out on a lot of life because I was so hungover that, I grew up in Alaska, so everybody drinks up there. But, I didn't want to go skiing. I didn't want to do those things that I loved because I was in bed and feeling sick. The other sign that you're moving into alcohol use disorder, addiction, as opposed to just problem drinking, is that you just keep doing it despite health problems. So your liver starts to be damaged. I remember in college, the doctor, he said, I was 25 and he said, your liver's slightly inflated, right? And I'm thinking, oh, well, that's not too bad. And I'm young. Like, really? So I just kept drinking. And then I start taking milk thistle and, jogging and doing all this stuff so that I can have my cake and eat it too. That's called bargaining with my addiction, right? But I kept doing it. See? So each of those things is a red flag. The more you see of these things, the bigger the problem. As we continue to use and drink, our brain continues to become more addicted, and it makes relapse more and more likely. But the good news is that those same changes mean that the brain can also heal with help. So why do some people spiral while others just have a rough week? It's a mix of factors: nature, nurture. There's spiritual side. I'm convinced of this too. There's genetics. Science likes to maybe see if we can figure out the cause and the treatment of addiction. But honestly, just like human beings, it's complex. Genetically, like me, if addiction runs in your family, you are more vulnerable. So it's about 60% more. I think it was a DEA agent on my Genuine Life Recovery podcast one time, and he was saying something to the effect of, if somebody told you that flight to Florida had a 50% chance of crashing, would you get on the flight? Of course you wouldn't. I mean, I wouldn't. Those are some pretty bad odds. 60% if it runs in the family, and yet we still do it. We still pick up that drink. So genetics is a big team player in the game. I lost my brother to addiction. My grandfather was an alcoholic. Uncles, those that didn't quit drinking are not alive anymore in my family. Here's the thing. It's progressive. It doesn't get better. You're not going to be able to manage it. You're not going to be able to manage it. We try to manage it. These are the methods we've tried. I don't know if you've ever read that in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's pretty funny. Look it up. All the things we tried. Drinking, for me, giving up beer and only drinking tequila. I'm only going to get a pint. And then inevitably I would drive back to the store, one eye driving back to the store because one pint just wasn't enough. So, there was always these things that I was only drinking on weekends, all these things I was trying to do to manage it. None of them worked, friends, none of them, until I quit, completely stopped. So then we have our environmental and personal factors. Okay. So one of the things that's huge is if you start drinking early, before 15, you are more likely to develop alcohol use disorder, become an addict older in life, because again, your brain, it's basically being formed around this addiction. So your brain now becomes sort of wired for this addiction. I started drinking at 14. You look at environmental factors in my life growing up in Alaska, need I say more? It's cold, it's dark, people drink all the time, except in the summer when it's light 24/7, So again, and then let's look at trauma, abuse in childhood. I was dyslexic, told I was stupid. There were other things going on. So people who have endured that type of trauma, people who have mental health issues, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression. I had an anxiety disorder. I was self-medicating with alcohol. I had an anxiety disorder. I was self-medicating with alcohol. So these are all factors. These are all risk factors, as they call them, for becoming an alcoholic later in life. And I had them all: the genetics, the family history, the environmental, the psychological. These often tag team with drinking, co-occurring disorders, right? You have a substance use disorder and an anxiety disorder. You have substance use disorder and bipolar disorder. These are all going to determine the type of treatment that you need. So watch the next video that comes out next week, and it's going to talk about how to find the right treatment and what's the criterion for treatment. But if you know these risk factors, you can intervene early, or you're noticing this with your kids, then it's time to intervene. There was no intervention done in my childhood, and there should have been. Let's look at this from a biblical perspective. Wine is a mocker. Strong drink is a brawler. It tells us in Proverbs 20, verse 1, whoever is deceived thereby is not wise. This means, as we know, drugs, alcohol can make us feel tricked. One minute we're partying, the next we're in a bind, wrestling with reality. We're thinking we're good to drive. I always thought I was okay to drive, right? In other words, booze lulls us into thinking we are in control, and then it knocks us flat. It's like the comedian who promises a joke and then delivers the truth you don't want to hear. The Bible's basically saying, don't let this stuff trick you, friends. It's dangerous. 1 Corinthians 10:13, 1 Corinthians offers hope on the flip side. No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. Okay? But with the temptation, he will always provide a way of escape. Translation: everyone battles temptation. But God's not about that you have failed alone. He's not about that vibe. He promises a way out, even if it's call a friend, even if it's find a group, or just a deep breath, a glass of water instead. But I do want to point this out, and this is where the serenity comes in, right? Where we admitted we were powerless over our addiction, that our life had become unmanageable, came to believe that a power greater than ourself, God, could restore us to sanity. So initially what this is saying is, I can't do this by myself. I need God to get me out of it. When you're chemically dependent, it's more than just a temptation. You are chemically dependent. Without it, you could die if you go through alcohol detox and you're too dependent. This is where you need to get into a detox program. Does that make sense? You need to fully detox, get into treatment, get help, okay? And then from there, work on resisting those temptations and things like that. Okay? Does that make sense? When I think of those smoky mornings, that verse reminds me, right? I survived them. By God's grace, I never have to drink or use again, and neither do you, friends. Hope in recovery from me to you. Can I just say recovery rocks? I am almost 20 years sober. My husband, 23 years sober. We met at church. If you had told us during those mornings after regret that we would be sharing Bible verses instead of hangover cures, right? We would have laughed. But seriously, faith and community, it changed everything. Galatians 5:1, for freedom, Christ has set you free. Stand firm. Do not submit again to the yoke of slavery. Think of it. Slavery is addiction. It's chains. You're running around trying to get that high because you can't deal with the withdrawals. Does that sound like a fun life, friends? The fun wore off a long time ago, and you know it did. This verse reminds me and reminds you that we are meant to be free, friends, not chained to the bottle. And each day sober, I get more of that freedom back. So if you're watching and you're thinking, man, that sounds impossible, remember this: if I can do it, so can you. Those risk factors growing up in Alaska, the genetics, I had them all. If I can do it, so can you. Oh, you don't know what I've been through. Trust me, if I can do it, so can you. I found purpose beyond the pint, traded closing the one eye for keeping both eyes open to God's work. And guess what, friends? Life is so much clearer now, okay? So, but let's get back to the problem drinking versus alcoholism versus full-blown addiction. And that is going to be early intervention. If you noticed a loved one that is teetering on that line, look for those warning signs. Typically, the young brain is not alcoholic yet, but these problem signs, this is when you've got to intervene. You've got to intervene. It's imperative. Okay, because as they continue on into college, like I did, it's going to get worse and worse and worse until A, they get sober like me, or B, they die like my brother, found dead in an Oxford house. My dad found him dead, tried to do CPR, and it was too late. Imagine doing that on your own kid? Because that's where addiction goes, friends. You can't manage it. It manages you. It's the devil, okay? So the earlier you spot the spiral, the easier it is to call a timeout. Talk to someone you trust, get medical guidance. There are biblically based programs, counselors, and if trauma or abuse has been in your story, treat it. You deserved a childhood where you felt safe. If that didn't happen, work on dealing with the unresolved pain. It's like a leak in your life, a leak in your self-esteem boat, and eventually it starts sinking. But plugging into that support can keep you afloat. God's mercies are new every morning, but sometimes you're going to need help. We all need help. Strong shoulder, strong counselor, hopefully one with a good sense of humor too, okay? So if any of this hit home, friends, I'd love for you to hit the subscribe button to Genuine Life Recovery. I drop videos on faith, hope, and humor weekly in the trenches of addiction. Also, hit that like button. It's cheaper than therapy. Okay, maybe not, but it helps other people find us too. If you have a story, if you have a question, comment below. I read them all. Maybe you've had a salmon scare too, or a one eye like me. I'd love to hear your story. And if you're wrestling with drinking or drug problems, don't lose heart. As 1 Corinthians 10:13 promises, there is a way out. It might start with admitting you have a problem. Bummer, I know. Then reach out for help. You're not alone. You definitely don't have to have it all figured out, because by God's grace and with support around you, you can write a story that goes from blackout to breakthrough. Stay safe, stay laughing, and remember, God has a bigger plan than the bottom of a bottle. Way bigger. God bless you. See you next time, friends, and thanks for sticking around till the end.